All right, today on the show, we have Marc Rucker from SoundExchange, and he is the Associate Director of Artist and Industry Relations over there. And for anybody who doesn't really know, SoundExchange is a way to collect royalties right from non-interactive streams. So I think every artist, we talked a little bit off camera, but I think every artist needs to be signed up with SoundExchange. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And let's just jump into it. Like, do you want to talk about maybe a 360 view of the royalty ecosystem with SoundExchange and maybe day one of an artist signing up and what that journey looks like?
Yeah. So, introing it kind of in that way. What I would say is SoundExchange, it was created about 20 years ago to collect and distribute the digital performance royalty for performers and rights owners. So it's a long word salad to say, if you're an artist or a master owner that releases sound recordings, you should sign up at SoundExchange. It's free to do it. And essentially what we do is we collect and distribute the royalty from non-interactive radio, non-interactive streaming, which is a very nuanced part of the business. But that means like anything like SiriusXM or Pandora or Music Choice or iHeartRadio, if it's streamed over the internet but not in your car, pays out an additional royalty for the performers and the master owner of a sound recording when it's played on those stations.
The way I break down non-interactive is where the end user, the listener, is not picking and choosing which song they want to hear at whatever time.
Correct. Yes.
You are listening to an already programmed kind of stream of something.
Correct. Yes. And I mean, there's a lot of confusion around, what about Spotify radio? What about Apple radio? What about those things? You're still at that point, that's like the gray area, but you are still selecting the station. You're able to skip to the next song. And in the case of what we're talking about, you would not be able to skip. You can't go backwards, that type of thing. And again, very nuanced part of the business, but SoundExchange has been around for 21 years now. We've paid over $12 billion, and we're at $1 billion a year paying out right now. So it's a very significant part of the industry.
It's massive. And it was relatively new when I started in the industry, which was 2010. So I think that was just
same year.
Yeah. So like a few years in to SoundExchange becoming like this new area of collecting royalties.
Yeah, no, right when I graduated from Belmont, I started business management, and we were signing up artists at SoundExchange. And I mean, it's artists that were having number ones, and we didn't really know what to expect. And I mean, you could just see the change and the transition from, once you make some of those royalties, you're like, oh, now I get it. Now I'm starting to understand this. And at the time, like signing up for SoundExchange was Excel files and fax machines and all these difficult pieces. But now, you go to the website, there's a whole login portal there. You can claim your own songs, claim your own recordings. You can update everything right there. It's actually significantly better than what it used to be. And it's just SoundExchange has grown tremendously as a company.
And so SoundExchange collects SiriusXM, right?
Yeah, so Sirius is a great example of what we would be collecting from.
I've noticed this relatively new kind of feature on SiriusXM where you can kind of like skip back. Have you noticed that?
I haven't noticed that. So I think that there's always these interesting like nuanced parts of the business, and of course, like Sirius and all types of different businesses continue to try to update features and do different things like that.
But it definitely still applies.
I was going to say ultimately, it's going to come back to the Section 114 license that we work on, that Congress created, that SoundExchange would collect on this from. So anytime those features are introduced, though, it's always something that we continue to take a look at, and SoundExchange audits our partners and really works with them as well. So, yeah.
Well, shout out to Congress, but Congress, you still got a lot of work to do.
Dude, I mean, we can get into that. I think it is fascinating to as long as I've been in the business, I mean, I've been in Nashville my whole career, from business management to artist management to publishing, and now being at SoundExchange. And I guess you kind of hear about it like, oh, the Copyright Royalty Board, or, oh, this legislation, or whatever it is. And it's like, really, without legislation, it's really hard for creators to continue to get paid and get paid on time and get paid a living wage, or like what they would want to be the higher amount. So like, I still encourage anybody in the business or any creators to like, let legislators know that like you want royalties to go higher, or you need legislation to come into play. Like right now, and I mentioned before, like we're working on the American Music Fairness Act, the idea that like the U.S. is one of the only countries in the world that do not pay performers for terrestrial radio airplay. Like it's the United States, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so it's this fascinating like oversight of like, why aren't our performers being paid when in every other democratic country in the world, they are getting paid.
Yeah.
So I guess to say that, not to, go too far into that, I guess, but legislation does matter in music, and it's actually pretty fascinating when you really dive into it.
Yeah. So anyways, you got a lot of work to do still. We're on the right track, but I feel like the term starving artist has been around for decades and decades and decades. And now in 2025, I feel like artists, they're really starving. Like we need to like change a couple things here.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So kind of going with like the industry constantly evolving from your perspective with SoundExchange specifically, how are you guys kind of keeping up with like the ever evolving music industry and new platforms and new changes?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the best parts about SoundExchange, I mean, again, it's only 21 years old. When you look at other CMOs or, PROs, those types of like BMIs, ASCAPs, similar types of companies, but different rights, different royalties setups. We were lucky. We were built in the digital era. So everything that we do is digitally native.
Yeah.
Everybody that reports into us is relatively digitally native. When you look at the other, others, it's much harder because it came in analog. They're having to update systems and all that stuff. So what I would say is that SoundExchange has done a great job of continuing to update our systems. We have, I think it's over 140 million sound recordings in our database, which other companies, other places are able to use that in order to match data. I think it's probably one of the biggest oversights in what we had in music for a long time was that when we switched from this, CD and cassette business to, online, digital music, it went to like kind of a data business. And so we needed infrastructure to manage that and manage it efficiently. And so, within that, it's really about how quickly can we get payments out? How quickly can we match everything?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's required upon, the artists when they register, we get them set up with a login that they would just log in. And then we have a new tool that's called Search and Claim. And Search and Claim is where you literally search your artist name or your track titles or your album titles, and you just select the ones that are yours, and you're able to claim from there. And then they're manually looked at to make sure that they're accurate.
I was gonna say, how do we verify that?
Well, I was gonna say, so we have our team that does that in house, and we use a couple of different tools, but then also at the end of the day, there's fraud prevention and a bunch of different pieces of that. But ultimately, it comes back to the artists and their team letting us know that these are our recordings. We need to associate those with our accounts, and that's how we get money to flow through.
Just as you would with a traditional PRO. It's up to you. It's your responsibility to log your set list from the tour and say, hey, we performed all these songs at every show.
Sure. And it's just true on the PRO side. On our side, I would say that once you have the recordings linked to your account, the performer is never going to change because it's a sound recording. It's fixed, right?
Yeah.
So you only have to do it once. And then ultimately, when you keep releasing music, you just want to make sure you keep going in. And I always recommend every 6 months at least, or once a quarter, just jumping in and making sure that you've claimed all your recordings because, live recordings, features, all types of different things. It's not just your albums, right?
Yeah.
So anything that you would be having a live recording of or a recording of, a sound recording, would be claimable through our system.
So what about like TikTok and Instagram? Because obviously music is integrated through there as well. So is that something that also applies with SoundExchange?
No. So again,
okay, if it doesn't, should it?
Well, I think this is where the legislation comes in. So when you look at legislation, it's very nuanced. And so what we would like to see is that, again, SoundExchange has all the setup and the entity to pay out royalties from a bunch of different places. And so at this point, though, TikTok and Instagram and all that, they have direct licenses. There isn't a performer royalty, right?
So they pay like a blanket license to
a distributor or even to, obviously they work with the PROs, the MLC, that stuff. And that's more on the on the songwriter and publisher side. Right. On the performer, the featured artist, and the rights owner or the master owner side, there's only a specific essentially again nuanced ways to make these royalties right now. But yeah, we'd love to see that expand. Yeah, of course.
Okay, Congress, I know you're watching. Let's fix this.
I mean, at the end of the day, man, you'd be surprised. I've in the kindest way possible, I've tried to figure out a way to explain this to people in the industry, but it's like I've equated it to like trying to explain to my grandparents, like, this is how the music industry works. and this is what we get from it. And then you have to ask them how much they think you should get paid for it.
Yeah.
And so it's really important for you to share a story of like, man, we spent all this money to make zero or to lose money, but we're getting, you know, all these eyeballs on us, and somebody's making money off of us. Somebody's making money off of this creation. Someone's making money through this. Why is it getting back to the original creators is really what the question should be. And I think they've tried to answer it, but as the, you know, technology evolves and things continue to happen, they move so much faster than what legislation does.
When everything's growing at an exponential speed and rate, it's hard to keep up. You're constantly playing catch up.
Right.
And then obviously Congress is notoriously slow.
Yeah.
They can be fast when they want to, but generally they're slow.
Yeah. No, totally.
It's almost like I'm trying to find a good analogy to break it down. Is it like, okay, you have Jeep manufacturing the vehicle, right? And that would be, let's say, TikTok. I don't know. And then the artists are the ones who are manufacturing the wheels, the tires specifically. And then without the tires, then
there's no Jeep.
Yeah. So,
you're not going anywhere.
Like, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
So, and if we think of artists and creatives as like a creative fuel for a platform, I feel like we got to like compensate them on that.
Well, and then what's interesting is that, you know, we're talking about TikTok or Instagram, but I would even say an even more stark example. Again, we go back to this terrestrial radio example. Again, America is one of the 4 countries in the world that do not the performers do not have a right to get paid from airplay. So what that means is that only songwriters and publishers receive royalties from terrestrial radio airplay.
And when you say performers, are we talking about like other musicians maybe who are hired guns on the studio recording session?
Yes. So just like SoundExchange. So we pay out to the featured artists, we pay out to the master owner, and then there's a 5% fund that goes to the AFM fund and SAG-AFTRA for background vocalists and for backing musicians that would also participate in the royalty. Same idea for terrestrial radio. But you know, this has been fought against by the Broadcasting Association to say like, we do all this for the music industry, which, you know, for decades has been true. But at the same point, the industry has changed. The royalty systems need to update as this is happening. And so, you know, the amount of time and management that I've spent, you know, we spent a lot of time, you know, doing free radio shows that didn't really actually benefit as much as what we needed it to.
Yeah.
But it did end up costing the artist money, the label money, different people around them money. And so you just hope that money comes back in ticket sales and merchandise, but there's no guarantee of that. Right. So all around the world, they figured out, well, since there isn't a guarantee of that, we should at least guarantee the musicians of these sound recordings something. Yeah. And I just always put it back to, you know, when you think about radio, it's like, if you guys are fine with not paying the performers, then play demos, play songwriter tracks. You're not playing any of those because you know that it's not going to work. Yeah. But I do think that there has been a lot of movement in it. We did have Randy Travis and his wife did come speak to Congress with us in June, and we did a hearing at the House Judiciary Committee, which is really cool. It was such a surreal experience, you know, all the people you would see on TV talking and all that stuff. But it was fascinating because I think a lot of people overlook that we're hitting an era of time where all of our favorite musicians are getting older. Their royalties aren't set up this way. That's the reason why we have musicians touring until they're 70 or 80 because they have to go out and tour in order to make their money back. So it's fascinating to me.
Man, if anybody's having a hard time right now tracking and keeping up with the information on this, I mean, the music industry is so fucking complicated and layered. And part of me thinks it could be easier if we all just rallied together to make it easier. But I think the complex thing works in advantage of certain players in the industry, right? Obviously. Let's talk about maybe, you know, because since SoundExchange does cover so many different areas, what are some overlooked areas in terms of where they should be like recording or logging, like where it's getting streamed? That might be overlooked. You know what I mean? So you mean as far as like the artists, or if there's just like let's just say there's an independent artist out there, and where are some areas that they're overlooking and they're not like logging it with SoundExchange? Oh, okay. Well, what I would say, if I'm an independent musician, I'm really thinking about what's my return on investment? Because if you're independent, you're trying to get kind of to the level where maybe you get the choice to be independent. You can also get a deal, something that could actually help, you know, grow your business on a larger scale. I think that's what ultimately everyone kind of goes back to, is whether it's a label deal or some sort of investment or something you could put back into yourself.
I think that there's a lot of focus on metrics that don't return on the investment as quickly. It might take, you might get, a couple 100,000 Instagram followers, but is that going to return the investment that you're going to need?
Yeah.
So you have to figure out ways to open that third door. And so, back when I was in management 5 or 6 years ago, when I was working with some larger clients, we were able to really participate in the brand partnerships. Beginning part of that, I felt like in the music business. And we really focused on that because we saw that as an opportunity to grow revenue, which ultimately could go into the business, which could ultimately grow it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always about what's your return on investment. And so I do think from a SoundExchange perspective, if you're an independent artist and you release sound recordings and you own them, you make 95% of the royalties that come into SoundExchange. So I know probably 15 to 20 independent musicians off the top of my head that fund their entire business just from their yearly SoundExchange royalties. Yeah. And I think that that's such an opportunity to really think like, am I running my business like a CEO would, or am I just running it like an artist would? And there's definitely like some nuance to that. But ultimately for me, it's always come back to what's the ease of collection. I think SoundExchange arguably makes it the easiest. If you are the artist, if you're the master owner, you just jump in and claim it, and that's it. And then once you do that, you just make sure that you keep up with your claims, and that's essentially the ease of it.
Yeah. Here's maybe a gray area that just popped in my head. Like there's this platform online called Nugs where bands and artists can stream their concerts. I know like Dead and Company, Grateful Dead, they do that a lot. Probably Billy Strings, a lot of acts in the jam world use Nugs to stream their live concerts. Does that apply to SoundExchange?
So I'm not specifically sure about that, but what I would say is that since it's not technically radio, that it would depend on the license that artist has signed with that streaming service.
Okay.
Right. So I would probably say probably not, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some, nuanced way that it could get there. Yeah. Again, if they recorded it and they keep playing it, then that would technically be something they'd have to do. But if it's live, it could be a totally different license. Yeah. But and there's a lot of nuance to this, and like you said, apologies for going deep, and then it's a lot.
It's information that everybody needs to know about. It's just dense. It's heavy information.
Yeah, but I've really been riffing on this stuff. So I go speak at panels a lot and conferences, and I ask this question more now than I ever have of like, as an artist, like what's the furthest that you've traveled for one show? And like you get the answer of like 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours. I'm like, okay, 12 hours. We'll say that. Spend 12 hours over the next 4 weeks working on your PRO royalties, your MLC royalties, your SoundExchange royalties, and you're just working on distributor, making sure that you've got yourself set. And I guarantee in that 12 hours, you will have made more money than you made in that one show. Yeah. And because you will last longer, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to just break it out and go, you don't have to know 100%. Not every CEO knows 100% about their business, but what they do know is they know people they can reach out to. So it's like, I just need to know the right questions to ask. Yeah. So if you just know like 25% as you're going, then you get to 30%, then you get to 40%. You're like, okay, now I get how they all work.
And that makes me think of like, it's not so much how many resources you have, it's how resourceful you are.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I actually, it's funny because, me and my friends have always talked about, again, that gatekeeper mentality or the idea that it's complicated on purpose. And, that's probably true in some ways. And I wouldn't disagree with it. But what I would say is that there are more resources now to figure out how to do all of it, as opposed to 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, all that stuff.
Just make sure the information you're absorbing is from a credible source. Sure. Not just some random dude spitting out some regurgitated information that could have some errors.
Yeah, of course. And, I don't know. It's so funny. I have a friend I just saw recently, and he was talking about, he just got out of his first deal, and he's like, man, I really messed up on that. It's so funny because you hear that story a lot. It's like the first deal, the first time you do something, you are going to have things that you might miss here and there. But it's so important is to continue to educate yourself and to stay curious about it, and then to stay up with it, And I know we're going to talk a little about AI and all that, but I do think that those are the things that the industry's headed there, our world's headed there. It's important for us to continue to think in that direction.
Yeah.
And just be aware of it, you know?
I feel like you're somebody in the industry who definitely has their finger on the pulse of what's coming down the road. So like, what's some stuff? Let's talk about Web3. Let's talk about AI.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go first?
Man, where would I go first? I mean, I personally, like, I was in management for a long time. I was always looking for that third door, so to speak. Right. And, during 2020, 2021, I got to be a part of a lot of different projects, and a couple of them happened to be in the NFT space, which, you know, everybody has like a whole feeling on NFTs. What I would ask you is just to say, like, just forget about the medium and just think about what the process was. And it was about trying to find a different way to create value out of something you've created.
Yeah.
And so right now our value structure is through streaming services or through, you know, royalty services. The promise or the idea behind NFTs or Web3 or owning a digital asset is that it's not necessarily like a royalty, you know, 0.003 per stream or something like that. It could go back to this like ownership business, the idea of like, you get more than just something for your ears. You could get something for your ticketing. You could get something for, you know, your fan club. You get something for just keep going down the list. So what I would say is that I think it's important to continue to evolve your business and to know who your fans are. Like, if your fans are kind of on the bleeding edge of technology, it might be good for you to look at how can I continue to evolve with them. And so I guess through all that, like I was going to say, I think the NFT business and all that stuff really was a big eye-opening experience, I think, for a lot of people. And we kind of got to see that, like, oh, okay, maybe it didn't happen yet, but we're headed to a world that seemingly this Web3 world where you can own digital assets. Yeah. And that's where something that most people haven't grasped that concept yet. Right.
Because if we're going into this digital, we're there, we're in the digital era. Right. Sure. And so we still are doing vinyl sales, but that's, I mean, I don't know. I think that might start falling off again. But sure, if you just think about the history of the music business and fans, they have a record in their hand or a CD even. Sure. And that's ownership. Like I spent money, I invested in a product. Yeah. I have like some sort of ownership of the art in my hands. Sure. And in the digital world, like you said, ownership of a digital asset, that could be the new wave. Yep. Where the fans feel like they do have some ownership in the art. Sure. And there's great examples though of like companies that are, putting, little NFC chips in merchandise or vinyl, and you're able to tag your phone to it so that they know that, oh, like not only do you own it in the physical world with your vinyl, but you also own it on chain with your wallet, and they can send you free stuff. They can send you tickets. They can send you VIP packages. They can invite you to things that you wouldn't necessarily get invited to if you just had the physical vinyl, right? So I do think there's going to be these interesting new tools that artists are going to be able to use. And then I just always came back to this idea of who are your first 1,000 fans are really going to be the people that are going to keep building your career over a long period of time. And then you get to the 10,000 mark and then keep going further. But, there's so many studies showing that like 80% of your what you earn will come from probably 20% of your fans when you're an artist. So it's really important to think about who are those people? Who are those people who are going to be with me for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And how can you keep cultivating that relationship? And so it's been shown over a long period of time. Like, we had these iterations of fan clubs, and those were, they would come to CMA Fest and we would do one thing in a bar, and they would pay, great money for the merch and the meet and greet and all that stuff. But now there's a whole digital era, right? Yeah. So you have social media, and it's like, how are we monetizing these opportunities with fans and to make sure that we give them value and then also receive the value back? Do you envision a time where it's going to be all digital? You mean like music? Just music, and going back to the term of ownership from the fans' perspective. Yeah. Do you think we're going to get to a place where it's going to be like a digital world and that's it? Like, well, yeah, I mean, absolutely, to an extent. I have kind of like maybe a strange worldview on this, because I do think we already are. I mean, so much of our world is digital already, right? I do think that there is a reason to not kind of go too deep into that.
I do have feelings that, people are going to want to try to shy away from being in the digital world and get rid of their digital footprint. But I also think if you want to participate in the new world, it's going more digital. And I think everything from, Web3 to the ideas behind certain crypto and then the ideas in AI, I think we have a massive amount of opportunity that's ahead of us. And you're talking about a generation that's coming up that's natively digital.
Yeah.
They're all in their 20s and 30s. And I mean, I grew up, I was at I was probably 12 or 13 when we got dial up, and like realizing like, okay, so I've kind of seen what was the world like before, what was the world like during, and then now what it's turning into. And I'm like, I can't imagine being someone that's 10 or 20 or 30 years older going like, this world moves so fast. But for me, it's moving fast, but not too fast. And I think for the younger generation, it's like, this is right up our speed. Like, we're ready.
Yeah. Oh man, it's a trip. Because we both started in the music industry relatively at the same time. Yeah. So when I started, literally year one of working in the music industry, it was CDs. We're selling CDs.
Yep.
And then Spotify hit. And then everything slowly, but then quickly started changing to a streaming mentality. But and by the way, didn't you just see Napster sold?
Yeah, 207 million. Yeah,
yeah, like what?
Well, I mean, brands matter, right? So I think that's what's going to be interesting is like, what does that turn into? There's been conversation about Napster becoming a Web3 digital asset company before. I think there's a lot of opportunity with it. But I was going to say something interesting about Spotify or streaming when it was coming in, and maybe you had the same experience. I was at Crush at the time, and Crush is like a big management office. They have in New York and LA, they have huge rock bands and they're really successful. They're awesome. But they got early access to Spotify to just, to people just to see how it would work and all that stuff. So I felt like one of the first ones around my friend group to have it. And I remember showing people like, hey, like, check this out. Like, this is that streaming thing, and this is, and your point, like, this is in the download era where it's like, 69 cents, $1.99, $1.29, that type of vibe. And so I was showing people like, look how easy this is. And like, look, I just skip to the next one, or I don't have to buy it. Not a big deal. And I probably 3 or 4 of my mentors were like, that's never going to work. I'm like, really? Why? And I'm like, well, people want to own it. They want to know it's on their phone. And then the second thing was like, what about their data plan? Aren't they worried about the amount of data that you're going to be getting on your phone? And it's just so interesting how like evolution of the technology works, right? And it took a moment, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like this is how this is going to work. And now everybody's going to get on it. And, for years, that's what the conversation has been, is like, how do you get more people on streaming? And now we're at this mass level, right? So now it's like, how do we increase royalties? How do we make sure that the value proposition still works for the creators?
Right. I was going to say, because as streaming comes into play, then kind of the value of music started to decrease in certain areas. And then but I think it also propped up the live aspect of the music industry. When there's so much music out there to consume and you're lost in the flood of it all, you still have your core bands and artists that you like, that you're going to pay money to go see live. And I feel like the live industry is like booming right now.
Oh yeah.
Especially after COVID, when everybody was stripped of it.
Yeah.
And now they're like, we're back.
No, of course. Yeah.
So that leads me to AI, which is a subject that people are either stoked on or they're afraid of it.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing in AI in terms of artists navigating it, utilizing it, the industry navigating it and utilizing it?
Yeah, I think, again, I not to bring it back to like this idea of legislation, but I do think it's going to be interesting to watch because we're watching what the EU's doing. We're watching what, England and Great Britain, and we're watching in Japan. What is happening around the world? Because, we at SoundExchange and these conversations that come up, we really do talk about this in a way of like, how do we make sure that artists and the creators are credited and compensated fairly? Like that's essentially what it comes back to. And so we're constantly in these conversations, but yeah, like I think Marsha Blackburn's been doing great and trying to push forward this Elvis bill, the idea behind name, image, likeness, including voice, because the right of a federal right of publicity to your voice is actually going to be really important as we move forward. But I do think AI in a general sense is going to continue to change and evolve our business. It's going to change every business. It's probably going to change everyone's lives, whether we want it to or not. I think it's about how are we going to make sure that people are, again, they can opt in to it as opposed to being told like, hey, you're being used for AI and we're not going to credit you or compensate you. So we want to make sure that happens. And then again, credit where if we do use your works, that you do get credit for that. And then ultimately you get compensated for it.
Yeah.
I think those are the main characteristics that we continue to come back to. I think there's a lot of people working on that right now. But if I was a creator right now, I would be figuring out the ways that I could use it for my business that could help benefit me. But at the same point, not completely rely upon it because you don't know what's about to change with it.
Yeah. I mean, a simple way on the creative side is it's a great brainstorming tool. Sit down, like maybe you don't live in a city like LA, New York, Nashville, Austin, where the music is booming and you have access to go co-write with people. Maybe you sit down and let ChatGPT be your co-writing partner and brainstorm song titles and themes of songs. And like, maybe it'll spark something cool for you.
And I think ultimately it's like, it's kind of, I don't know, for me personally, I use it kind of as like I guess in a way brainstorming, but ultimately I'm just like, I wonder what would happen if I tried this. I wonder what would happen if I tried this. I was just talking to a friend at breakfast and he was saying, he's like, I wish I could put in my statements so it could pull out all my transportation write-offs for the year.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, well, you can do that on ChatGPT now. Like you can just put in your statements and say, I need you to total all these up.
Yeah.
And it's like that stuff is going to just blow people's minds. And that's where I'm like, as an artist, it's not even about being creative. It's about like, well, now it's about helping running your business. And if you're being your own CEO, if you're having to, do your own taxes, which a lot of artists do, and you have to figure out what are my write-offs as a small business owner, as a creator, as a traveler, those types of things. And ultimately, I do think eventually we'll get to a point where AI will be as beneficial to the royalty business as it is to these other parts of it.
Yeah.
I really do believe that it's going to make it a little bit more straightforward and there'll be some really good opportunities for artists and writers to use it in order to help them log everything, help them, register everything and all that.
And on the dark side of it, like recently there's been talks and, just a lot of people creating AI generated music, uploading it to the DSPs, collecting money on that. But now there's technologies coming out where it's detecting that it's AI generated music, which is fantastic because I think real creators should be the ones being compensated, we can't compensate the AI. Like,
no, totally.
You can't just be a thief and steal it.
Yeah, no. And I think that's like, this is where, again, I think we're at such the bleeding edge of these things where there isn't regulation. So I think until that happens, until those regulations start to come out, it's really hard to step around this stuff. But I do agree. I think the DSPs continue to have to work on that and make sure that when things that are AI related or AI created, I guess, in that aspect, that they are, being, watermarked or whatever it is. And so there's companies like Vinyl that have come out. There's companies like Humanable that have come out to basically help with that. I will say one of the nuanced parts of this is, and if you guys pay attention, read the Copyright Royalty Boards or the Copyright Office's new guidelines on AI. It's pretty fascinating because I think ultimately one of the things that's going to come back to is like what's fair use and what isn't. Yeah. And how much AI is enough and how much human do you need? How much AI do you need before it's copyrightable? And I think that's the ultimate test that we're all going to kind of face.
What's crazy is those guidelines were written by AI.
Yeah, right. Honestly, like, isn't that our future, right? Where it's like, well, this is gonna work. That's why I always say please and thank you when you're talking to your AI. By the way,
but that's a great point about fair use. I totally forgot about fair use. What is fair use right now? Not talking about AI, but fair use. Isn't it like 30 seconds and it has to be in context with whatever's going on?
Yeah, there are some very specific guidelines. So I don't know if I could speak to that. I wish I was a lawyer, I guess.
If I had a fact check segment, we'd include it.
But no, truly, I think that's gonna be one of the nuanced parts of this is gonna be just the argument around fair use. And because just an example, this isn't music related, but this is when over the last few years this has come up. Like ChatGPT had a lawsuit on it from New York Times, because it was using the New York Times articles to train its model. But ChatGPT would say, well, that's fair use because they're out there. We can just scrape them and use them. New York Times and other entities, it's not just them, but they would have the argument to say, well, no, people wrote that. That's our content. We own it. You guys have to compensate us for it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what's the idea behind fair use? Is it fair that it's out there and you can just use it? Or is it, no, they should compensate them because they're using it to train their models?
Well, yeah,
this is ultimately going to be the question behind like Udio and Suno, these AI music models that are essentially have used sound recordings and lyrics to train their models, but without letting people know that they've used them. Again, opting in, they haven't credited them, and then ultimately haven't compensated them yet. And I think that's going to be one of the things is like, how do we make sure that that's happening?
Yeah. Damn. Talk about the modern Wild West.
Oh, right.
That's crazy. But I hope that Elvis bill passes. Did it pass in Tennessee specifically? Or it was generated in Tennessee?
Yeah, it was generated in Tennessee. So Marsha Blackbird was behind it. And, I think that ultimately it will be passed. I don't think it did. I think they had to reintroduce it. I think it just came out again over the last couple of weeks with a new Congress, obviously. Okay. But I would imagine that one will be done pretty well. But at the end of the day, again, I've had to learn this in the music business. Like, there's a surprising amount of what we do that's legislated, and it's important to kind of talk through that and figure out, if you're an artist, like, can you do a DC visit with your congressman? And SoundExchange, we host artists all the time, and we had Boys to Men go and speak on our behalf about the American Music Fairness Act bill, and they met with several elected officials, and again, same with Randy Travis, same with several artists that have come through town, and so. If people have that inclination to kind of speak their story, like, you should definitely do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope it all passes, because at the end of the day, with a creative and an artist, it's like you have your name and likeness, you have your copyright, and you have your master recordings if you own them.
Correct.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's the three levers you have to pull. That's your mailbox money. That's everything,
Yeah. When the name and likeness, I mean, that's also your live business, right? So your ticket sales. So that's where time out of your yearly schedule that you have to go out on the road. And, when you're 25, it feels great. You want to be out there, but when you turn 30, 35 and you start having kids, you get the family life, and then it's like, oh, how many artists have you heard that missed, the birth of their second kid because they were traveling? Yep. And like, there's a interview with Luke Combs that literally I don't think I'll ever forget it, just because he was talking about he was in Australia, missing the birth of his second child. And he wasn't, he was definitely emotional about it, but it's like, would his decision have changed if he was making more royalties where he wouldn't have to take all these large shows? And that doesn't mean he would or he wouldn't. I'm just saying that we don't have the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think giving people the opportunity to make the royalties that they should be earning, the right, when other people are making money off of them. I mean, again, just going back to this terrestrial radio bill, it's, terrestrial radio is a major business. It's about $15 billion business, and they don't pay anything to the performers.
Right.
So it's a pretty fascinating, oversight, if you ask me.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
And I'd like to wrap up with some fill in the blank questions for you.
Oh, sick. Okay.
You ready for this?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Artists need to get better at blank when it comes to sound exchange, data, and royalty distribution.
I would just, again, once you register, the main thing I would say is making sure you use the search and claim tool. I would do it once a quarter if you're releasing music, at least once every 6 months. All that means is you log in and you use the search and claim tool to search your name, and just making sure that the things that you are a performer on or the featured artist on is that you've claimed and associated to your account. So ultimately, that's what they need to do more. I would argue that the majority of our money doesn't get caught up because the majority of our royalties don't get caught up because of artists not registering. It's because they registered 3 or 4 years ago and then didn't go in and claim their recordings. And now they've just been accruing royalties, and we're constantly reaching out and saying, hey, you need to claim this or you need to do that.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
And when we say artists have to treat themselves like a business, this is a prime example of you got to do the business side, and this is it.
Yeah. But again, like I said before, I would argue that, everything seems like this big bear when you start. Once you do it once, twice, you're going to do this in 10 minutes and be like, oh, that was so much easier than I expected.
Right. Okay, here we go. This is a double whammy, fill in the blank. Okay. Over the next 5 years, artists need to focus more on blank and less on blank.
Ooh. I would like to see artists focus more on the first 1,000 fans than the next million.
Oh,
so like
that was a great answer.
Thanks. I think there's just a conversation that it's always about the next million fans are the ones that are going to break you. When I think in reality, those are the passive fans that will come and go. If your first 1,000 fans like what you're doing, the next million will come, right?
Yeah.
And you want those more diehards. Those are going to be the people that are going to stick with you. And again, there's metrics all around this that like 80% of your money that you make as an artist and musician will mostly come from the 20% of fans that you make at the beginning.
And that first 1,000 fans that are with you from the jump, they're going to be the loudest, biggest champions of you to their peers and their other friends who are music lovers.
Right.
And that's where you find the speed of growth.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
This has been a great conversation.
Yeah,
Thanks
man.
for doing this with us.
Of course. Anytime.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Yep.